My daughter-in-law told me to stay out of sight at their anniversary party, so I stood beside the lawyer quiet, visible and holding the real deed. The music didn't stop. I stopped it. Her smile dropped before the first clause was read. My son looked at her. She looked at me, and I looked at my house back in my name, where it belonged. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The folding chair was floral, faintly sun-bleached, and wedged next to the plastic drinks table like an afterthought. A sweating tub of sparkling water and store-brand sodas loomed beside it. Helen Monroe lowered herself slowly into the seat, adjusting the hem of her soft lilac cardigan. Her knees didn't bend like they used to, but her spine still held straight. She looked out over the expanse of white party tents and linen-covered tables spreading across her backyard, and folded her hands in her lap. The early evening sun caught on the edges of rented glassware. Music drifted low and ambient from Bluetooth speakers, hidden in the hedges. Guests were beginning to arrive, women in floral maxi dresses and men in pastel blazers, exchanging air kisses and compliments rehearsed in the car. Kayla drifted over, a flute of Prosecco in one hand, a clipboard in the other. "Try not to wander, okay?" she murmured, her smile plastic and fixed. "Guests are arriving." Helen didn't answer. She just nodded once, then turned her gaze back toward the patio, where a hired photographer was arranging centerpieces for his shot. From her chair, she could see the living room windows. She narrowed her eyes. The fireplace mantel looked on. There had been a framed photo there for nearly 4 decades, her and Richard, her late husband, on their wedding day. Black and white, both of them laughing. She dusted it herself 3 days ago, gone. Inside, unseen by Helen, Maddie Monroe, 18, sharp-eyed and quieter than people expected, spotted the frame leaning sideways on the floor just outside the hallway linen closet. She bent down, brushed a scuff from the glass, and frowned. In the backyard, Helen quietly thanked the caterer passing by with stacked trays of hors d'oeuvres. He looked surprised, then smiled warmly. "Ma'am," he said, "didn't know you were the homeowner." Helen smiled gently, her tone even. "Most people don't." A few minutes passed. Laughter rose in waves from the far end of the yard, where Brad stood holding court in his blazer and boat shoes, waving at guests and pointing out the renovated historic property like a showroom model. He didn't glance her way. The chair beneath Helen wobbled slightly on the uneven flagstone. She steadied it with her foot. Then the side gate creaked. She walked in with the confidence of someone who had never needed an invitation in her life. Short, white hair tucked beneath a sun visor, handbag swinging from her elbow, a glittering cane clicking with each step. Her eyes scanned the crowd once, then zeroed in. "What the hell?" she muttered. She made her way over in brisk steps and planted herself in front of Helen. "Why are you sitting alone at your own house?" Helen looked up at her best friend and offered a small smile. "Apparently I'm part of the decor." Cleo's nostrils flared. She looked around like a woman counting exits in case of fire. "You're not even in the family slideshow." Helen blinked. "There's a slideshow?" "Oh yes. Brad narrating, Kayla curating, all curated memories that don't involve walls you paid for." Helen's jaw tensed. She reached up and touched the chain around her neck, her husband's wedding ring, warm from the heat of her skin. "They removed our photo." "Of course they did." Cleo sat on the arm of the chair, not caring who saw. "You gonna let him?" Helen looked over at the patio again. The filtered laughter, the champagne, the fake congratulations, about 20 years of marriage held together by image and Instagram filters. "No," she said. A hush fell across the party, not from her words but from a subtle shift in mood. The DJ's music faded into another track, something up-tempo and celebratory. Brad's voice called out over the crowd, "If everyone could start gathering near the tent, we're about to kick off the toast." Kayla's heels clicked quickly down the walkway as she passed behind Helen's chair. "Remember what I said," she whispered. "Let's try to keep things smooth tonight." Helen didn't turn. She didn't need to, because at that moment, Maddie appeared in the doorway holding the wedding photo still in its silver frame. She didn't say a word. She just held it up, meeting her grandmother's eyes across the crowd. Helen's lips parted, and for the first time that evening, her spine didn't just stay straight, it braced for something. The morning after the party, the silence in the house felt surgical. Helen stepped barefoot across the hardwood floor, the hem of her robe brushing just above the warmth left by sun spilling through the east-facing windows. The photo was back on the mantel now, placed neatly, silently, as if it had never vanished. No one had said a word about it, but Helen wasn't here for the photo anymore. She opened the bottom drawer of the antique secretary desk, the one Richard used to call the vault. Inside, tucked behind yellowing envelopes and decades of tax returns, sat a fireproof leather file pouch. She unzipped it slowly, the metal teeth catching slightly near the corner. Out came the deed. Original, notarized, clear. Her name, Helen W. Monroe, was stamped in bold, unshared ink across the ownership line. No joint tenancy, no Monroe family portfolio, as Brad had once smugly phrased it to a neighbor. Just her. She let the weight of the paper settle in her lap like a verdict. Later that day, Tom Reyes arrived. No briefcase, just a worn leather folio under one arm and his reading glasses hanging from his collar. He didn't need pleasantries. Helen handed him the deed, the way some people hand over x-rays, calm, knowing, already diagnosed. Tom studied the paper for less than a minute before nodding. No transfers ever been recorded, he said. You're the sole legal owner. He looked up, his voice softening. Did Brad tell people otherwise? Helen gave a single nod, her face unreadable, said it was part of their long-term holdings. Tom exhaled slowly. Let's get everything documented now, before someone tries to act cute. The kitchen transformed over the next 2 days into a war room cloaked in domestic calm. Cleo showed up with labeled manila folders and a portable scanner she'd borrowed from the church office. The two women sat at the table. Helen had refinished herself 20 years ago, surrounded by spread-out receipts, HVAC repair invoices, property tax confirmations, water bills in Helen's name, every last one of them signed, mailed, and paid by her. No wonder you never took a vacation, Cleo muttered, flipping through a stack of 208 roofing receipts. Helen didn't look up. Wasn't safe to. Cleo nodded slowly, her voice softening. We're not just backing up a claim, we're building a timeline. In the late afternoon, while Cleo double-checked scanned documents and Helen labeled a fresh binder, permits, POS, utilities, Maddie walked in from the back patio, her face pale. She hesitated. Helen didn't look up, but her fingers paused on the label maker. Everything all right? She asked. Maddie stepped further inside, lowering her voice. I just heard Dad on the phone. He was out by the grill, talking to someone from the office. Helen glanced up. Maddie continued, almost apologetically. He said, they'd list the house as soon as Mom moves out. Like it was already decided. Cleo looked like she might break something. But Helen, she just sat straighter. What exactly did he say? Her voice barely above a whisper. Maddie repeated it, word for word. We'll list the house once Mom moves out. The quiet that followed wasn't the shocked kind. It was surgical, controlled, focused. Helen rose, walked over to the counter, and opened the drawer where she kept her checkbooks. She pulled one out, flipped to the back, and scribbled a short note on a post-it call title office. Ask for full history and activity logs. She folded the note and handed it to Tom, who had just stepped back in with fresh printouts. I want to know exactly who tried what, she said. Tom read the note, then nodded without hesitation. I'll handle it. That evening, long after Cleo had gone home and the sun had dropped beneath the oaks, Helen stood in her dining room surrounded by stacked files, neatly labeled and sorted. She opened the binder marked DED POS proof and slid the original document into its plastic sleeve. Behind her, faint laughter rose again from the guest room wing, Kayla's voice mingling with Brad. Helen didn't react. She closed the binder, pressed her palms against the smooth cover, and whispered like someone finishing a prayer. 3 days out, the backyard looked like a wedding venue for strangers. Massive white rental tents rose like sails across the lawn. Helen had once seated by hand. Extension cords snaked under hedges. Folding chairs, 200 of them, were stacked in neat towers, near the shed that still bore Richard's initials carved into the trim. Kayla stood at the center of it all, with a tablet in one hand and a Bluetooth earpiece pressed to the other. "No," I said, "ivory napkins, not cream. There's a difference." "Yes, there is." Helen stood inside the kitchen, watching from behind the glass, like she was staring into someone else's life. She sipped coffee slowly, holding the mug with both hands. Behind her, Maddie scrolled silently on her phone. "They're already tagging the party in their brokerage account stories," she murmured. #legacy lifestyle. Helen didn't answer. By late morning, Kayla had come inside trailing floral samples and manic energy. "Helen," she said, pronouncing it like a task. "Just a quick note. If you're planning to attend Saturday, we'd love it if you wore something neutral." Helen looked up from the kitchen table, where she'd been sorting financial statements. "Neutral?" Kayla's smile widened. "Beige, cream, soft rose. Something that blends with the palette. Maddie and I are going blush and sandstone, and we don't want anything to, clash." Helen said nothing. She just nodded once, then returned to her papers. Kayla lingered. "It's going to be really elegant, I'm sure," Helen said. "Kaylin." That afternoon, Tom arrived again, this time with a crisp folder and a question in his eyes. Helen met him at the door. "Ready?" he asked. She stepped aside to let him in. More than ready. They sat together at the long dining room table, the same table Brad had used for his high school science project on water filtration. Tom slid over a single-page form, revocable trust amendment, updated to reflect a new sole beneficiary. Helen read every line carefully. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She took the pen. Signed. "Just Maddie now?" Tom asked softly. Helen looked at him. "Just Maddie," she confirmed. Later, Cleo stopped by unannounced with a small box of lemon cookies and a larger box of sharp opinions. She sat down hard at the breakfast nook and scanned Helen's expression like a nurse checking vitals. "You've been too quiet," she said finally. Helen sipped her tea. "You say that like it's a warning." "It is. You being quiet? That's when people should worry." Helen smiled faintly, folding a napkin on her lap. Cleo leaned forward. "Are you letting them get away with this?" Helen looked out the window at the crew now hammering tent stakes into her flower beds. "No," she said. "I'm just letting them get comfortable." By Thursday, the porch had become Brad's makeshift marketing hub. He stood with a wedding photographer and 2 interns from his firm, pointing toward the backyard with a clipboard in hand. "We want to showcase this as a generational property," he explained. "Legacy architecture, classic lines, multi-use hosting space." Helen stepped outside to water the potted geraniums near the stairs. Brad glanced at her, then back to the photographer. "She's the previous generation," he said casually, like narrating a museum tour. "Still lives here, but we're transitioning." Helen didn't flinch. She bent slightly, gently tipped the watering can, and poured life into the red blossoms. As she straightened, she locked eyes with Maddie, who just stepped onto the porch with a bag of groceries. The look they exchanged was brief, quiet, and deeply loaded. Maddie's voice was low as she passed her father. "You might want to stop calling her that." Brad looked confused. "What?" But Maddie was already inside. That night, Helen sat at the secretary desk, with her reading glasses on, and a blank page of stationery in front of her. The house buzzed faintly from the distant hum of outdoor lighting. She could hear Kayla giggling at something in the guest room hallway. Brad's voice followed, flat and tipsy. She dipped her pen into the inkwell, pressed it to paper, and began writing out the guest list for Saturday. It didn't include influencers or agents. It included Tom, a county appraiser, a title office liaison, and one name underlined twice: Notary Clay. Reliable, quiet, shows up on time. Helen folded the paper neatly, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it. Then she turned off the lamp. Helen found the folded note on her pillow just after breakfast. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed initials. The kind of stationery Kayla used when she wanted something to feel polite while delivering something pointed. We've moved your things to the guest room for the weekend just to make space for out-of-town guests. Hope that's all right. She read it twice, folded it again, then walked down the hall without a word. The door to the master suite was closed. A brass luggage stand had been propped outside, along with two floral print suitcases Helen didn't recognize. From inside, she heard Kayla's voice, high and giddy, giving a tour to her mother. And yes, we had all the linens pressed yesterday. Oh, Mom, wait until you see the ensuite. It's just dreamy. Helen turned without knocking. The floral comforter was freshly fluffed, but the mattress creaked faintly as she sat down. It wasn't hers. None of this was. In the bathroom down the hall, she found her perfume, her favorite one worn only on Sundays and anniversaries, gone from the mirrored tray. Her silver brush set, gifted on her 30th birthday, missing. Only the cheapest soaps and a room spray labeled Citrus Revival remained. She stared at the empty vanity counter for a long time before gently pulling open the drawer. Inside sat a pair of folded washcloths and a single disposable razor in shrink wrap. A lock clicked faintly down the hall. "You're kidding," Cleo whispered, snapping a photo with her phone as Helen opened the linen closet to find even her spare sheets replaced with Kayla's monogrammed ones. "I wish I was," Helen murmured. Cleo scowled. "They're staging your house for guests like it's a damn Airbnb." Helen didn't answer. She moved room to room, silent, noting which vases had been swapped, which artwork removed, which furniture polished for presentation. It wasn't just redecorating, it was erasure. A controlled clearing of Cleo walked beside her with surgical precision, documenting everything with quiet clicks. "We're time-stamping it all," she muttered. "Don't worry." That evening, Maddie found her grandmother folding sweaters back into a suitcase she hadn't touched in years. It sat open on the guest bed like a challenge. "You shouldn't be in here," Maddie said softly, standing in the doorway. "This isn't okay." Helen didn't look up. "It's temporary." "No, Grandma, it's wrong." Helen finally met her gaze. "Kayla's parents are here from Charleston. This is how they want to host." Maddie crossed the room, voice tight. "I'll sleep on the couch. You take my room." Helen's eyes softened. "No, this isn't about beds, sweetheart." Maddie frowned. "Then what is it about?" Helen smoothed the top sweater in the suitcase. "It's about understanding what people do when they think you've already surrendered." Maddie didn't move. "I haven't," Helen added. "I promise." Later that night, Helen sat cross-legged on the guest bed with a yellow notepad balanced against her knee. The bedside lamp cast a quiet circle of light. She tore a fresh page, then started writing names. Tom Reyes, Andrea Schuler, title office. Calvin Rose, appraiser. Clay, notary. Receptionist, county clerk. Tall, glasses, helpful. Ellen V., HOA board, quiet support. She underlined the word confirmed beside Tom's name, then scribbled a note next to Andrea's. "Bring full printouts, transaction freeze doc." The list grew slowly, each name like a brick in a foundation no one else realized she was laying. From the hallway, muffled laughter echoed again. Brad's voice, slurred. Kayla's shrill and distant. Her parents had arrived. Helen tore the page neatly from the pad, folded it into thirds, and slid it into the leather-bound binder at her side. Just as she reached to turn off the light, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Maddie. "He just told someone the house will photograph better once the old furniture is gone." Helen stared at the screen for a moment. Then she opened the drawer, took out a pen, and wrote a new name on the list. Estate sales specialist. No showings, just witness. She capped the pen, closed the binder. The appraiser arrived just after 7:30 a.m. in an aging black sedan with county plates and a clipboard, worn at the edges. Helen met him at the front door, dressed in charcoal slacks, and her late husband's cardigan, buttoned clean to the collar. "No signage, no uniform," she said as she let him in. "I'd like this to stay discreet." He nodded without asking why. "Of course." While the rest of the house still slept, Helen walked him through every room, not as a tour but as a record. Original crown molding. Hand-restored hardwood. A foundation retrofit funded after Hurricane Arthur kitchen appliances, replaced on her dime with receipts she kept in sequential order. The man scribbled, photographed, muttered measurements. When they reached the second-floor hallway, he paused. "These bathroom upgrades," he asked, tapping a corner of his clipboard. "City permits pulled by a Helen Monroe." She nodded. "No Brad Monroe listed on anything I've seen." She gave a half smile. "That's because he never paid for anything." The man made a note. "That'll be important." By mid-morning, Tom had joined them, bringing a slim envelope marked Title History Action File. The three sat briefly at the dining table, while just beyond the patio doors, folding chairs were being unwrapped and placed in tidy rows. Brad paced with a Bluetooth headset, rehearsing his weekend sales pitch to someone who used the word exposure too many times. Inside, Helen reviewed the report line by line. No recorded transfers. No liens. No co-owners. No sales activity. No escrow. No listing agreement. Until Tom pointed to a stamped reference buried halfway through the printout. A notice of intent to market, filed quietly 3 weeks prior under an entity name Brad had once used for a failed duplex flip in Raleigh. Helen stared at it. "He used a shell?" she asked, more impressed than angry. Tom nodded grimly. "Didn't file it directly under the house address. Thought it'd fly under radar." Cleo walked in right then, holding her phone out like a lit fuse. "Found this in the neighborhood group text thread," she said, scrolling. One of Kayla's influencer friends posted a teaser, "Private home tour coming soon. Think Southern charm meets modern staging." She turned the screen toward them. "Recognize the rug?" Cleo asked dryly. It was Helen's foyer. In the guest room, Maddie stood in the doorway, watching her grandmother stack documents into the emergency actions binder. "Grandma?" she said, voice wary. "What are you doing?" Helen looked up from the folder but didn't stop organizing, keeping what's already mine. Maddie stepped closer. "Is Dad trying to sell the house?" There was a silence so sharp it seemed to carve the air between them. Helen closed the binder gently and gave Maddie a steady look. "He thinks it's already his." Downstairs, Cleo opened her iPad and pulled up a PDF she'd saved from a real estate Dropbox folder. Brad had forgotten to unlink from his shared email. "Look at this," she said, zooming in. A signature block, time-stamped. Brad Monroe. Pre-authorization for property staging, digital key access, and seller prep. All signed. All automated. All dated. Helen took a slow breath. So he wasn't planning to ask. He wasn't even planning to wait. Cleo. Tom's phone buzzed. He scanned the message and raised an eyebrow. "County just flagged the sale for review." I triggered a freeze. Helen's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes settled, like a door had closed. That night, Brad found the glossy welcome packet on his desk, unopened, the corners sharp, still sealed in its shrink wrap. Inside, a letter from Helen's attorney, formally revoking any assumption of shared ownership, including digital representations, marketing use, or listing rights. He opened the first page, skimmed the line about unauthorized intent to transfer, and went pale. From the hallway, Maddie watched him reading, then quietly retreated. In her own room, Helen slid the original appraisal into a locked drawer beside the trust documents. She added a note with a paperclip. "Value higher than he thinks. Listed owner, me. Only me. Notes. No one else asked." She turned off the lamp, let the quiet settle in, and smiled. Just once. Saturday brunch unfolded like a catalog shoot. Pastel dresses, mimosa flutes clinking against the backdrop of curated hydrangeas, and Kayla posing at angles that caught just enough sunlight to smooth the narrative. "You wouldn't believe the interest we're getting," she told a group of women gathered around the fire pit lounge set. "Brad says we've got 2 soft offers already, both from cash buyers." She said it like she was talking about handbags. A woman in oversized sunglasses leaned in. "Wait, you're selling? This house is incredible." Kayla dropped her voice. "Well, nothing official yet, but we're exploring. With this kind of property, it's generational but adaptable." Behind the French doors, Helen stood watching. She didn't blink. Monday morning, Helen left the house in a pale trench coat and low heels, a thin envelope tucked into her leather tote. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. The county clerk's office was quiet, just the faint tap of keys and the scent of burnt coffee wafting from a back cubicle. Helen stepped to the counter, waited patiently behind a man renewing a business license, then handed over her folder to the clerk. "I'd like to update and reaffirm an ownership filing," she said. The woman in a navy cardigan and readers on a chain scanned the first page and then looked up. "You're Helen Monroe?" "Yes. And this property is solely yours?" Helen smiled. "Still is." The clerk nodded. "Let's keep it that way." Back at the house, Tom sat at the dining table reviewing screenshots Cleo had printed, posts Kayla had shared that week. Captions like "proud to open our home to potential buyers who see what we see, timeless potential," and "curating spaces that tell our story." Under one, she'd tagged the brokerage firm's official account. Tom shook his head slowly, jaw tightening. "That's a licensing violation and a representation error." Twice. He opened his laptop, typed swiftly, and sent a formal cease and desist to Brad's brokerage, flagging unauthorized claims of ownership and unauthorized marketing activity on a non-transferable property. The email was direct, cold, and copied to the firm's legal department. Dappered Brad called 20 minutes later. Helen let it go to voicemail. Then again. This time Tom picked up. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Brad said, his voice clipped but forced casual. "Look, we were just exploring hypothetical scenarios. It wasn't formal. Kayla got ahead of things. We weren't trying to. Your email address filed a pre-listing agreement under a shell LLC." Tom interrupted. "You authorized staging and access." A pause. "We didn't mean for it to be misleading," Brad muttered. Tom's tone didn't shift. "It's not misleading. It's documented." On Wednesday, a small box ad ran in the Wilmington Herald, tucked between a retirement seminar listing and a lost cat post. It was formatted in plain font, legal and dry. "Property ownership notice. Helen W. Monroe is the sole registered and rightful owner of the residence at 431 Pineview Avenue. No transfer, co-ownership, or listing authorization has been granted to any party. Any inquiries should be directed to attorney Thomas." Cleo clipped the ad from the paper and framed it in a cheap acrylic stand, placing it on Helen's kitchen counter beside the coffee pot. "Subtle," she said, "but final." That night, Maddie curled on the sofa with her laptop open, earbuds in, eyes narrowed. She wasn't studying, she was compiling. Each tab was a post. Kayla twirling in the remodeled dining room. Brad posing with a bottle of wine labeled Monroe Cellars, a fake brand he'd mocked up as part of his lifestyle realty image. Maddie screen recorded them one by one, dated them, filed them into a folder labeled False Claims and Image Use, Private Owner. From the hallway, Helen appeared, holding a mug of tea. Maddie looked up. "I don't know if this helps," she said, "but I'm tracking everything they've pretended is theirs." Helen stepped forward and gently touched her granddaughter's shoulder. "It helps more than you know." She stared at them like someone studying damage, then opportunity. From inside, she heard Kayla laughing. Helen closed her eyes and breathed in slowly. Then she turned and went to her room. She unlocked the top drawer, retrieved the notarized trust revision, and laid it next to the appraisal file. Then she opened a new folder labeled in thick black pen, Next Phase. The morning was warm, unusually still for late spring, and the air carried that faint hum of a shift, the kind of hush before something turned. Helen smoothed the hem of her slate blue blouse and took one last look at the papers laid out before her. Everything was aligned: the revised trust, the supporting documents, the appraisal summary, her will, updated and initial. The top document bore Maddie's name in clean serif type, sole beneficiary, Madison E. Monroe. A knock at the door. 2 short raps. She opened it to find Clay standing with his briefcase in one hand and a small portable notary seal in the other. "No rush," he said, smiling. "Take your time." They sat at the same breakfast table where Brad once spilled orange juice into the grout lines as a boy. Helen didn't linger in the memory. Not today. She signed, slow and clear. Every line, every margin, every page with weight behind the pen. Clay notarized each signature with care, stamping and marking with mechanical grace. When it was done, Helen exhaled, not relief, exactly. Something quieter, like settling. Clay stood. She'll know, he said. Helen nodded. She already does. At noon, Tom hand-delivered the newly finalized documents to Brad's attorney, who received them at a cafe near the brokerage office. The man barely touched his latte. Tom didn't sit. Your client's interest is officially revoked, he said, placing the manila envelope on the table. You may want to advise him to adjust his language moving forward. Then he left. That afternoon, Kayla posted a quote to her story in bold italic over a photo of her holding a champagne flute. Inheritance is not entitlement. The caption read, "Sometimes the lesson has to be learned the hard way." No names, no tags, just smoke. Maddie saw it from the passenger seat as Helen drove them home from the post office. She turned her phone toward her grandmother. You want to see this? Helen glanced at the screen, then turned back to the road. No, she said, but thank you for offering. Maddie smiled. You're kind of a badass. Helen didn't respond, but a small smile curled at the corner of her mouth. The next morning, Cleo showed up in a lemon-yellow blouse and a sun hat shaped like an exclamation point. She carried a tin of scones under one arm and a ceramic teapot with a knitted cozy under the other. Time for tea, she announced, stepping into the foyer like she'd just taken back France. Helen raised an eyebrow, celebrating something. Of course, Cleo said. She set the table with practiced hands, pouring strong black tea into mismatched china cups and arranging the scones with just enough flair to irritate Kayla if she ever saw it. I thought we'd toast early, Cleo said, before the fake party makes the air taste like hairspray. They clinked cups. To the real homeowner. That evening, Helen stood at her bedroom window, watching the string lights flicker to life across the lawn as Brad ran his final tech check with the sound crew. Kayla barked something at the caterers about candle placement. Her parents arrived with monogrammed wine charms. None of it mattered. Behind her, the sealed folder labeled Next Phase sat beside a silver picture frame. Maddie had quietly returned to its rightful place on the mantel. Helen turned from the window. She opened her closet and pulled out a deep navy dress, sharp lines, quiet confidence. She hadn't worn it since Richard's retirement party. As she laid it across the bed, her phone buzzed once. A text from Tom, all documents received, logged, verified. You're bulletproof. Helen exhaled. Then she turned back to the window and whispered, more to herself than anyone. Let them toast. I'll give them something to drink to. Helen opened her closet to an absence, the navy dress she'd laid out the night before. Gone. The hanger it had rested on stood crooked, slightly swaying, like it had been bumped in haste. She stepped in slowly, her hand gliding along the rod. Her navy heels were missing too, so were the taupe ones. In their place sat a dusty pair of foam-soled flats she hadn't worn in 5 years, and a plastic garment bag containing something beige. She unzipped it, linen, blousy, labeled with a boutique tag she didn't recognize. From the hallway, Kayla's voice floated in like perfume turned sour. Just wanted to give you a little something to wear tonight. We weren't sure if you'd be visible. Helen stepped out of the closet, slowly, deliberately, and walked to the doorway. Kayla stood at the end of the hall, hair curled in large soft waves, lipstick too pink. She smiled, bright but shallow. We're doing family photos at golden hour, she said, adjusting a rhinestone clasp on her bracelet. Blush and neutrals only. This way you won't stand out too much or, clash. Helen looked at the dress in her hand, then back at Kayla. She didn't speak, didn't need to. She closed the bedroom door gently. 10 minutes later, Helen emerged wearing a matte black sheath dress with a structured shoulder line and silk piping along the hem. It hugged her spine and stopped precisely at the knee. Quiet power. It was the dress she'd worn to the city council gala the year they renamed the historical district, back when people still sent handwritten invitations and said thank you like they meant it. She stepped into soft black pumps she'd retrieved from the cedar chest beneath her bed. Then she opened the jewelry box. Inside, Richard's wedding band. It lay flat on the velvet, still gleaming from the polish she'd given it last month. Helen slid it onto the fine silver chain she wore most days, the same one Maddie had fixed after it snapped last spring. She fastened the clasp and let it settle against her sternum. She didn't speak right away, just held it out. Helen took it and unwrapped it carefully. Inside, cushioned in linen, were a pair of vintage pearl drop earrings with filigree gold hooks. Helen's breath caught. These were, "You gave them to Mom," Maddie said. Her voice was steady. "After her first book award, I found them in one of the bathroom drawers. Kayla had tossed them in with the guest toiletry kits." Helen turned the earrings gently in her palm, then met Maddie's eyes. "Fitting," she said. Then she smiled. A rare, full smile, not polite, not restrained, quietly devastating. Downstairs, the party lights came alive as the sun began to dip. The sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter hummed through the walls like a faraway rehearsal. Kayla was already outside directing the photographer. Brad's voice rose in bursts, confident, rehearsed. Helen clipped the earrings in slowly. No mirror check. No second thoughts. She looked down at her hands, steady, and then at the chain resting over her collarbone. Richard would have called it her armor. From the window she saw guests begin to turn toward the tent. The microphone was in place. They thought this was the reveal. They had no idea. She crossed the room and opened her binder one more time. One last review. The trust, the deed, the verified appraisals. A letter with Tom's signature, dated and time-stamped. Everything filed, everything legal. Helen closed it. Just as she reached for the handle, she paused. From the hallway, a voice drifted toward her door. "Brad, she probably won't even come out. Just let her stay upstairs." Helen's hand tightened around the doorknob. Then slowly she turned it. The backyard glowed in warm twilight, strung with Edison bulbs and rehearsed smiles. Guests clustered under the tent, their drinks fizzing softly in crystal stemware, as the caterers moved with quiet choreography. Every detail had been staged for maximum polish gold flatware, rose-water spritzed napkins, faux rustic signage that read 20 years building a legacy. Brad tapped the side of his glass with the stem of a fork. The microphone in his other hand gave a small feedback squeal, then settled. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began, voice honeyed and full of self-congratulation. "We just want to say thank you for being here to celebrate with us. 20 years of partnership, of growth, of turning vision into legacy." He paused for effect. Someone clapped early. Kayla giggled and reached for his arm, eyes darting to the photographer. Brad raised his glass higher. "We're proud to say this home has been the heart of it all. Our foundation, literally and figuratively. Every detail, every inch carries our story." Kayla beamed and extended her arm with a practiced flourish toward the house behind them, as if to say, "Look what we've made." The guests followed her hand with murmurs of approval. A few clinked their glasses. Then, a hush. Not loud, just still, like a shift in barometric pressure before a thunderclap. From the left side of the tent, near the side gate, Helen stepped into view. She didn't speak. She didn't rush. She simply walked across the stone path with deliberate calm, black dress cutting a quiet, clean silhouette through the candlelight. The pearl drop earrings caught the amber glow and flickered like tiny stars. The silver chain at her collarbone gleamed once, Richard's ring resting just above her heart. Maddie stepped aside to let her pass. Behind her, Cleo smiled into her teacup. At the edge of the tent, Helen came to a stop. Tom Reyes appeared beside her, crisp and composed, a single manila folder in hand. Brad faltered. The crowd shifted. Kayla's smile froze, eyes narrowing. Tom took the microphone gently from Brad's stunned grip. "If I may," he said calmly, voice smooth and commanding. "Just a brief clarification for the record." Some guests chuckled, assuming a joke was coming. Tom opened the folder. "This home," he said, lifting a page, "is solely owned by Helen Monroe. As reaffirmed, certified and recorded in county records as of last week." Silence. Then the audible shudder of a camera, then another. Phones lifted. Tentative at first, then in waves. Kayla blinked. "Excuse me," Tom continued. There has been no transfer of ownership, no co-signing, no listing rights extended. Any claims suggesting otherwise were filed in error and have since been formally rescinded. Maddie stepped into the frame, her phone still by her side, but eyes fixed only on her grandmother. Helen looked out over the guests, not smug, not angry, composed, present, like someone finally stepping into the light. Kayla's mouth moved, but no sound came out. A voice from the crowd, low and unsure, asked, "Wait, so the house isn't theirs?" Tom looked up. "The house," he said, "never stopped being hers." Brad's face reddened, a twitch in his jaw betraying every failed attempt to hold composure. Helen reached out and took the microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This is not a toast," she said, "just a truth." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the drapes of the tent. "For years I've watched this home become a backdrop for other people's performance. But this house, this land, this structure, every corner was never theirs to rebrand." She held up the folder, then handed it to Maddie. "It belongs to me. It always did." Maddie took the folder with both hands. The guests watched in total stillness. Some had stopped recording. Others hadn't. And somewhere behind the linen-covered dessert table, Kayla's mother gasped audibly. Helen looked once toward the porch, once toward her granddaughter, then turned and began to walk back toward the house, but not before adding over her shoulder, "You're welcome to stay for cake. After all, it was baked in my kitchen." For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. The echo of Helen's final line seemed to hang in the canopy lights like smoke, lacing the air with something no candle scent could cover. Truth, bitter and burning. Then the silence cracked. Kayla spun, heels catching awkwardly in the edge of the tent carpet. Her clutch dropped. No one bent to retrieve it. This is completely inappropriate," she hissed, voice too loud, trembling with performance and panic. "You ambushed our party, Helen. You hijacked it." "She reclaimed it," Cleo said flatly, appearing near the buffet with a glass of sparkling water that now shimmered like a toast. Kayla's face flushed deep pink. She looked to Brad, who stood frozen, hands still hovering near the microphone stand, the shape of his practiced speech still half-formed in his throat. "I'm not staying for this," she muttered. "I will not be publicly humiliated," but she already was. She stormed toward the house, brushing past a server with a tray of mini tartlets. The clatter of silver against porcelain followed her exit like punctuation. A murmur rippled across the tent. Some guests whispered. Others exchanged uncertain glances. One woman clapped just once and stopped. Another raised her glass in quiet acknowledgement. Brad tried to recover. "Well, folks, I think we've had a slight misunderstanding," he said, forcing a chuckle, voice wobbling under the weight of disbelief. "Family dynamics, right? Always entertaining." He turned toward Helen. "Mom," he said carefully, "maybe we can talk about this." Tom stepped between them and handed Brad a thick white envelope. "You'll want to read that." Brad stared at it. "What is this?" "Formal notice," Tom replied, "of financial disinheritance, effective immediately. You've been removed from all current and future trust documentation, permanently." Brad looked up, blinking like he'd been hit and hadn't yet decided whether to bleed. "You're joking." "I don't joke on letterhead." Maddie slipped her arm around Helen's waist, leaning in gently. "That was everything," she whispered. Helen turned to her granddaughter, her voice warm but steady. "You deserve to hear it out loud." The two of them stood shoulder to shoulder, while Kayla's voice could still be heard faintly through the open kitchen window, yelling about reputation and guests and unprofessionalism. Cleo, now barefoot and radiant with second-hand triumph, popped a bottle of champagne at the island. The cork hit the ceiling with a cheerful thwack, and foam spilled onto the tile as she poured without ceremony into mismatched stemware. "I think it's safe to say," she said, handing a glass to the caterer, "this party just peaked." The young man took it with a knowing smile. "She just won the party." He glanced toward the backyard, where Brad stood alone beneath his branded legacy sign, a string light flickering above him like a shorted bulb. In the corner, the photographer lowered his camera and quietly walked away. Helen entered the kitchen just in time to take the glass Cleo had saved for her. To Richard, Cleo said, raising hers. Helen lifted hers just slightly. And to never being erased. They drank. From the window she could still see the crowd thinning, the staged perfection unraveling by degrees. The man from the HOA waved up at her from the driveway. She gave a small nod in return. Behind her, Maddie entered the room, holding the folder Tom had passed back. "We should put this somewhere safe." Helen took it and placed it on the desk, right beside the framed photo of her wedding day. "No," she said softly. "We should leave it right here. Let them see it." Downstairs, someone turned the music back on, something low and slow. A different kind of party was beginning. And this time, Helen wouldn't be watching from the drinks table. The legacy signage had been left leaning against the porch steps, weather-warped and forgotten. Helen sat at the kitchen table in her robe and slippers, laptop open, mug of strong tea beside her. The screen glowed with rows of transactions, utilities, subscriptions, monthly services, all tied to accounts Brad had linked through his brokerage for convenience. She clicked remove access, then confirm. Then yes, I'm sure. One by one, the services unfurled: home security, landscaping, pest control, gutter maintenance, each with Helen's name returned to the billing header like a signature restored to a stolen canvas. She changed the passwords, rerouted the notifications, moved all autopays to her new bank account, newly opened and unlinked from any previous joint affiliations. At the final screen, she paused. A line item blinked: Legacy Home Watch, monthly remote surveillance, a service Brad had installed without asking, citing property protection. Helen narrowed her eyes. Then she clicked cancel entire plan and typed a reason in the box. Property fully protected by its rightful owner. That afternoon, Brad stood in the driveway with his phone out, a confused look tightening around his jaw. He tried the alarm app again. Still locked out, he turned toward the gardener, who had just arrived in a wide-brimmed straw hat and carried the familiar rattle of shears and spooled trimmer cord. "Hey," Brad called, "you get the new gate code? I'll text it over." The man smiled gently. "Don't need it. Ms. Monroe gave me the new one." Brad froze. She doesn't manage this anymore. I handle." "She does now," the gardener said, tugging his gloves snug. "And honestly, it's nice working for her directly again." He walked past Brad without another word, heading toward the side yard, Helen once planted with rosemary and lavender. Brad stared after him, then slowly lowered his phone. Inside, Maddie knelt beside a stack of cardboard banker's boxes, labeled with faded masking tape. Insurance, household, statements. Pre-2012, some had never been opened since her grandfather passed. Helen sat beside her with a small shredder humming between them, feeding in paper with quiet rhythm. "This one says mortgage docs," Maddie noted. Helen smiled faintly. "That mortgage was paid off 23 years ago." They both paused to appreciate it. Then the papers vanished into strips. "Feels like therapy," Maddie said. "It is," Helen replied. Page by page, folder by folder, they deleted a version of the house that no longer applied. Tom arrived just after 3, with another folder in hand. This one labeled in red ink, "Final Will, Executed Copy." "Last step," he said, placing it in front of her. She signed with her usual precision. "No reversions, no contingencies, correct. No inheritance to be held in trust for rehabilitation." Tom gave a short, approving nod. "Brad and Kayla are now legally uninvited." Helen slid the signed page back across the table. "Then it's finally quiet." Later, she stood by the window, watching the mail truck drive away. A new mailbox key rested in her palm. She'd had the lock changed that morning. Kayla's real estate mailers, once stuffed inside weekly, would no longer have a place to land. Across the street, a neighbor waved, one who hadn't spoken to her in months, likely thinking the house had already changed hands. Helen waved back. Maddie walked into the room, carrying a small metal tin. "Found this in the back of the filing cabinet," she said. It's your wedding receipts. Helen took the tin, turned it over once in her hands, then passed it back. Burn them, she said. The love was real, but the paperwork doesn't need to be. That night, as the sky darkened to velvet, Helen stood on the back porch, sipping a glass of lemon water. From the shadows near the hedge, Cleo emerged carrying 2 lawn chairs and a bag of pretzels. Thought you might want to watch the silence settle. Helen chuckled, taking the chair. They sat in comfortable quiet, listening to the wind in the trees, the steady hum of crickets. Think he'll try again? Cleo asked. Helen didn't answer at first. Then she leaned back and said, "Let him try. He won't get past the mailbox." By Tuesday, the clip had made it to Instagram. A 36-second video filmed vertically and posted by a guest too polite to name, but not polite enough to resist captioning it. Elder drops deed like a mic. Backyard justice. Deed queen. It showed Helen stepping forward, calm and composed, with Tom by her side. Then the line, now immortalized in block text over the screen. This is not a toast, just a truth. By Wednesday morning, it had racked up 42,000 views and made it onto a Wilmington gossip account, with the headline, "She owns the deed," and the moment. Maddie scrolled through the comments in amused silence, while Helen brewed coffee oblivious. "I hope I age like her," one user wrote. "Why is this more satisfying than an HBO finale?" Someone cast her in succession. Helen passed a hand across the newspaper crossword and looked up. "You're awfully quiet." Maddie turned the phone around to show her the screen. A meme. Helen standing under the tent with the folder in one hand, Tom beside her. Text across the top read, "Respect the deed." Helen blinked. "What is that?" "A meme," Maddie said, stifling a grin. "You're trending." Helen smirked. "God help us." That afternoon, the HOA president, Cheryl Gates, known mostly for overwatering her tulips and under-enforcing her bylaws, knocked at the front door with a mason jar of honey and a freshly printed newsletter. "I just wanted to stop by," she said, shifting uncomfortably on the porch, to say, "We all saw it, the video." Helen raised an eyebrow. "And?" Cheryl smiled nervously. "And? Good for you." She handed over the jar. "This is from our hive out back. My husband said he hasn't seen a takedown like that since Judge Mathis." Helen chuckled, then took the honey. "Appreciated. Oh, and the board wanted me to let you know that if you ever want to host the fall social again, the invitation's open, fully open." Brad stood in line at Corner Market behind the Mitchells, who barely acknowledged him. Mrs. Allen, who used to rave about his firm at block parties, now looked straight past him at the frozen pea. And Kayla, once greeted with hugs at her spin class, now found her water bottle moved to the back cubby twice. At the cafe, Helen spotted Kayla's friend Brittany whispering to 2 women by the window, their glances flicking back and forth between their phones in the door. Brad stepped in, and they went silent. Cleo called it social foreclosure. Friday afternoon, Cleo arrived with a homemade sash made from a gold curtain tie in glitter glue letters that read, "Most underestimated matriarch." Helen stared at it in her kitchen. "You're not serious." "Oh, I'm deadly serious," Cleo said, crowning her best friend with no warning. "For years you let them talk over you, dress you in beige, assign you to the drinks table. Now, you made the porch into a courtroom." Helen laughed, fully this time. The kind that filled the room, warm and full-bodied, echoing slightly off the tile. Maddie peeked in from the hallway with a smirk. "Grandma," she said, holding up her phone. "You're now officially a verified neighborhood icon. The local account gave you a badge." Helen looked at the screen, shook her head and poured more tea. "Well," she said, "I suppose it's better than previous generation." From her porch swing, Helen watched as Kayla walked stiffly to the curb, pulling a rolling suitcase behind her. No one waved, not even the neighbor's dog barked. Helen didn't rise. She just sipped her tea. Behind her, the framed newspaper clipping sat on the mantel. In the hallway, Maddie updated the nameplate on the mail slot. And out on the front step, Cleo taped a new handwritten note above the doorbell. It read, "Ring only if you respect the deed." The envelope was thick, cream-colored and stamped in red. Notarized final notice. Helen slid it into the outgoing mailbox herself, the flag raised against a sky just starting to bruise with dusk. Inside the envelope were 3 pages, stapled and initialed. The first, a formal eviction notice from the guest room and all associated storage spaces, effective immediately. The second, a legal summary of unauthorized occupancy, signed by Tom and witnessed by Clay. The third, a personal line in Helen's steady, blue-inked hand. You were guests, not successors. She didn't expect them to open it. She expected them to deny it, but that wasn't her concern anymore. By noon the next day the letter had arrived at the temporary apartment Brad and Kayla were staying in. An over-furnished corporate rental above a nail salon with walls thin enough to hear every dryer cycle. The envelope sat unopened on the counter between a burned soy candle and 2 unpaid invoices. Brad stared at it like it might explode. Kayla picked it up once, then set it back down with a shake of her head. If we ignore it, it's not enforceable, she muttered. Brad didn't answer, because deep down he knew better. That same afternoon, Tom met Helen in her foyer with a calm expression and a portable scanner. We'll need to file proof of delivery, he said, clicking his briefcase open. Helen handed him the signed USPS receipt, and the digital timestamp from the surveillance camera pointed at the front walkway. Already logged, she said. I want this to be unarguable. Tom smiled. It already is. By evening, the locks had been changed on the guest suite door, and all their remaining items boxed and labeled in the mudroom, each bin tagged by name, each piece of mail forwarded to their last known address. There was no scene, no yelling, just protocol. At 9:41 p.m., Helen's phone lit up. Brad, voicemail. She let it ring, then another, then a third. She waited. Let the screen dim. Then finally played the first voicemail on speaker as she stood barefoot in the kitchen. Brad's voice cracked, frantic with rage wrapped in entitlement. You're ruining everything. You think this makes you noble? Cutting us out? Locking us out? This was supposed to be our future. You want control? Fine. But don't pretend you're the victim here. You made this ugly, Helen. You did. Helen listened with the stillness of someone observing weather from inside a well-built house. Then she tapped delete. And just like that, the storm ended. Maddie found her upstairs later that night, reorganizing the drawer where she kept the family documents. Helen was rearranging them into fresh folders: medical, trust, tax, property, each one labeled in sharp black pen. I wanted to give you this, Maddie said, holding out a white envelope, hand-addressed. Helen hesitated, then took it. Inside, on heavy linen paper, Maddie had written, "Thank you for being my real legacy, for showing me that dignity isn't quiet, it's deliberate." Below that, a pressed camellia from the garden. Helen didn't speak. She just closed the card gently, held it against her chest, and reached for her granddaughter's hand. Outside, the porch light flicked on automatically as the timer ticked over. From the curb, you could see a row of labeled bins waiting silently for pickup. Kayla's heels, Brad's cufflinks, a framed photo they'd once posed for in front of Helen's fireplace. None of it was forgotten. It had simply been removed. The table was new, at least to Helen. Wide planked oak, reclaimed, wax finished, delivered that morning by 2 local carpenters who smiled when she paid in cash. It sat centered beneath the kitchen's old pendant light, bare but for a linen runner and a vase of garden cuttings. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang once. Maddie answered. Cleo came in first, arms full of peach cobbler and sass. "You didn't tell me it was formal," she said, eyeing Tom's tie. "If I'd known, I would have worn something with fewer pockets." Tom chuckled as he stepped inside behind her, holding a bottle of Barolo in one hand and a box of legal files in the other. Always prepared, Cleo. 2 of Helen's neighbors arrived shortly after, Ellen from the HOA and Mr. Dyer from next door. No fanfare, just casseroles and soft hello. Helen stood at the head of the kitchen, apron still dusted with flour, sleeves rolled just so. Her hair was pinned up, a single pearl earring glinting each time she turned her head. The meal was simple: roast chicken, fresh rolls, sautéed vegetables, iced tea in mason jars, no plated server, no hashtags, no speeches. But when the plates were cleared, Helen placed a felt-tip pen in the center of the table. "Start a new tradition with me," she said. "Sign the underside. First dinner, first pea." They each took turns crouched awkwardly beneath the table's lip, laughing at the logistics. Ellen wrote neatly, Cleo signed in all caps. Tom added the date in block numerals. Maddie's signature came last, just her name, followed by a small drawn camellia. Then Helen reached under, pen steady. Helen W. Monroe, home, still. Later Maddie stood on a step stool in the hallway, with a hammer and a brass nail. In her hands, framed in black wood and matted cream paper, was the deed. She hung it straight, just beneath the antique clock, and stepped back. Tom came up behind her. "Looks right there. Feels right too," Maddie said. Like it was always meant to be seen. In the kitchen, Helen filled glasses one last time. The sky beyond the windows was now lavender and fading. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon zest. Dishes soaked quietly in the sink. She raised her glass. "Just one toast," she said. Everyone looked up. "To quiet returns," she said, holding their gaze, and loud exits. Laughter rolled in easy waves. Cleo lifted hers next. "Best party I've been to in 30 years. I was going to say 40. Ellen murmured. Even Tom smiled as he swirled the wine in his glass, and no one even tried to sell a timeshare. They clinked. The moment settled. Not like dust, like clarity. Helen exhaled, the kind of breath you forget you've been holding since before the storm started. She leaned against the counter, watching her guests, her people, no forced smiles, no curated narratives, just belonging. Later that night, after the leftovers were boxed and the chairs straightened, Helen stepped into the hallway alone. She looked up at the framed deed, ran her finger once along the edge. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Peace doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it just looks like stillness. From the guest room, Maddie's soft humming carried down the hall as she put away the last set of dishes. And in the mudroom, unopened and forgotten, one last box remained, the only one not marked for return. Kayla's handwriting on the side. Inside, a corkboard, still pierced with pushpins. A photo of Helen and Richard slightly yellowed at the corners. Pinned beside it, a paper with scribbled goals in Kayla's handwriting. Secure equity, build brand, protect legacy. It hadn't worked because legacy was never about leverage. It was about who kept showing up when no one else deserved the keys. The morning air had the kind of crispness that hinted at a season changing. Not cold, just aware of its own quiet. Helen stepped out barefoot onto the dew-touched patio, coffee in one hand, the other brushing against a lavender sprig that had bloomed early. The garden had rebounded fast, as if it too had been waiting for a different kind of care. The old patio furniture had been restained and rearranged to her rhythm. No Pinterest symmetry, just comfort and sun alignment. She took the same path she always had, but now without detours, past the hydrangea hedge, around the coyless through the arbor that Richard once built in pieces over 2 summers. She paused beside the rosemary bush and closed her eyes as the scent reached her, earthy and clean. Inside, Maddie's duffel was zipped and waiting by the door. Her college acceptance letter had come weeks ago, but she delayed her move to finish what she called the real curriculum. Now it was time. Helen didn't make a scene, just packed sandwiches, slipped a letter into Maddie's backpack, tucked a 20 in her travel mug, knowing she'd find it halfway up I-40. When it was time to go, Maddie walked back in after a final round at the car. Keys in hand, she placed them on the table on the same reclaimed oak slab everyone had signed that night. "One for the house," Maddie said, smiling. "One for when I come back." Helen nodded, eyes bright, but dry. "You'll always have both." They hugged. Then Maddie was gone. No dramatic exit, just the sound of the driveway gravel shifting. A pause at the curb, and then forward. Helen lingered in the doorway, then turned back inside. She passed the hallway photo again, the one Maddie had framed, not from any event, just Helen standing in the kitchen with flour on her cheek, and a look of command softened by a crooked smile. It wasn't posed, That's why she liked it. She reached her desk, opened her leather-bound journal, and wrote a single sentence. They had the party. I had the property. Outside, the afternoon softened into late light. The silence in the house wasn't lonely anymore. It was hers. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tom. Congratulations. All filings complete. You're now sole title holder on county record. Not even a challenge filed. She tapped the screen, saved the message, and archived the thread. The doorbell rang once. A delivery. When she opened the door, it was a package. No name, no return address. Just a gold envelope inside. She opened. Inside was a small card with a single sentence. Typed, "You played it safe. We built it bold." Helen stared at it for a long time, then dropped it into the shredder without another glance. That night, she pulled on a soft cardigan, poured a glass of wine, and returned to the back patio. The string lights were hers again, and the shadows held no whispers. She didn't speak, didn't need to. She reached for the journal again, and under her morning note, she wrote the final line. I was told to stay out of sight, so I stood beside the deed instead.